So what we have here is a diagrammatic representation of the description given of the heavens in the Arcana Coelestia number 4286 subsection 2. And I've entitled it The Structure of Consciousness, just to remind us that whatever is said of the heavens also has an application to the individual human mind. And so the divisions we see in the heavens, the three divisions, are also divisions that are found within the mind. And this is by the law of correspondence. So just coming to the diagram, what you'll see is that there are three heavens that are mentioned, and the first is the celestial or third heaven. This is the inmost or highest heaven. The middle heaven is called the spiritual heaven or the second heaven. And then down below that we have the first heaven, which is also termed the ultimate heaven. This is the most external heaven. Each of these heavens are divided into an external and an internal aspect, and we can see that on the left-hand side of the diagram and the division line running through each of those heavens. If you move over to the right-hand side, we have the various motivations that exist in those heavens, or what they are principled in or governed by. And we see that so far as the third heaven is concerned, it is governed by love to the Lord. So the angels of that heaven are in love to the Lord. That is their central or core love. In the second heaven, or the spiritual heaven, this heaven, along with the ultimate heaven, are both governed by charity towards the neighbor, also termed mutual love. But what draws the distinction between those two loves or motivations is that in the second heaven, the neighbor is loved more than oneself, whereas in the ultimate or first heaven, the neighbor is loved as oneself. So there is a subtle distinction drawn between the motivations of those two heavens, but they both are motivated by love toward the neighbor. If you look at the ultimate heaven, what you'll see there is that the division, the internal-external division, has specific angelic qualities. The internal of the ultimate heaven is what is termed celestial natural, whereas the external of that heaven is called the spiritual natural. And what we discover is that the celestial natural is governed by an affection for good, whereas the spiritual natural is governed by a knowledge of truth. So that gives us a fairly good overview of what's described in AC 4286 subsection 2. So the discussion continues on, and the focus becomes the spiritual or second heaven and how that is structured. And what we see there, as you can see from the diagram, is that in the internal aspect of the second heaven, we have what is termed the celestial spiritual man, and this is represented by Joseph. But if you come to the external, what you see there is also we have the celestial spiritual man, but this time the representation, or the person who represents that, is the person Israel. So this can be a little confusing because the same term, celestial spiritual, is being applied to two different characters within the scripture, or two representative people within the scripture. So what's going on here? Well, one is the external, obviously, and the other is the internal. And the reason for this kind of doubling up is due to the need to maintain the correspondence or integrity of the word. So what we are told in 4292 is that because Jacob wanted to be representative of a church, it meant that a new internal had to be set up whereby the correspondence between the internal and the external of the church could be maintained. Jacob represents and continues to represent the Lord's divine natural. And that for that reason, if Jacob is be a representation of a church, then there is a need for an internal to which that external can be adjoined. And that internal required a change in the name of Jacob to Israel, so that so far as the word is concerned, it could speak of Israel and Jacob, and by referring to Israel was directing our attention towards the internal of that church, and by Jacob it's external. And that's illustrated in the number of scriptural references that we're given here, illustrating the point. I mean, scriptures that use both names, Israel and Jacob. And when we read those scriptures, because those two different names are used, we are able to be drawn into the internal sense and draw the distinction between what is being represented and what is actually representative. So Israel is what is represented, and Jacob is the representation. So you're talking about different levels. Now, what we're told is that, in fact, the true celestial spiritual man is actually Joseph, and Joseph is the rational man, whereas Israel is the internal of the natural, and therefore is termed the natural man, or because he is the essential of the natural, being the internal man, or the celestial spiritual man in the natural. So without getting into too much more detail, that is the reasoning behind why there is this shift or change of name with relation to Jacob. He must become Israel in order for the correspondence within the word to be maintained, so that Jacob could both represent the natural man and, in the highest sense, the Lord's divine natural, and so Israel could be the representation of the internal, where Jacob is characterized as the representation of the church. So you'll find that there is a PDF of the diagram that you can download and perhaps use as you read the relevant numbers. So if you hold the diagram before you as you read 4286 subsection 2 and then 4292 perhaps subsections 2, 3 and 4, hopefully things will become clearer. That's it for now, and I just wish you well in your work. Thank you.